The brazier has barely settled from yesterday's embers, yet the old records on the shelf have begun rustling on their own again. Strange thing, isn't it? Daoists vanish into the wilderness for days, months, even years. But the moment fresh rumors drift through the jianghu, their footsteps somehow find the road back here. Come, warm your hands and your curiosity alike. Tonight's tale carries the scent of immortal incense, hidden fortunes, and trouble clever enough to wear a smiling face. An old chronicle records that whenever rare treasures emerge across the continents, destiny begins moving its pieces long before anyone notices. While Ma Kuxuan sits imprisoned within True Martial Mountain's divine martial hall, where even ancient deity statues seem to bow before him, cultivators everywhere are being drawn into gathering storms of fortune and conspiracy. Chen Ping'an has now boarded the treasure-swallowing whale bound for Parasol Leaf Continent, only to gain an unexpected companion in the mysterious Naturalist Lu Tai, whose prophecies, strange behavior, and hidden insights may prove more valuable than any immortal treasure. Yet, as a single casual remark shakes Chen Ping'an's understanding of his own Dao Heart, a far greater turning point quietly approaches. A mountain can look deserted and still be holding back thunder. True Martial Mountain, one of the two ancestral militarian powers of Eastern treasured Vile Continent, had already changed in silence. Over the past year, its cultivators had scattered like drawn blades. Many marched north toward the Great Li Empire, while others chased their own opportunities through the central nations. To outsiders, the mountain seemed thinner, quieter, almost hollow. But in the cultivation world, quiet never means peace. The name that dragged True Martial Mountain back into noise was Ma Kuxuan. This young newcomer, who had only joined the mountain a few years ago, had once again shaken the sect. This time, he had beaten a sea observation tier cultivator to death. And the terrifying part was not that he killed. In a militarian sect, death was never unfamiliar. The terrifying part was that there seemed to be no deep hatred behind it, no feud, no blood debt, no unavoidable life and death grudge. At most, there may have been some words, some friction, some ordinary resentment. Yet Ma Kuxuan still struck with the kind of merciless force that left no room for retreat. For a sect, this kind of disciple is both treasure and calamity. Talent can raise a mountain, but uncontrolled talent can also split its foundation. Two grand elders spoke on Ma Kuxuan's behalf, trying to protect him from the full weight of punishment. Even so, the verdict came down. Ma Kuxuan would be confined for 1 year in the Divine Martial Hall at the back of the mountain. Now, to ordinary ears, confinement sounds simple, a closed door, a year of reflection, a punishment meant to cool the blood. But the Divine Martial Hall was no ordinary prison. Inside that hall were the honored images of past patriarchs and ancient deities whose names had nearly faded from the world. Their statues had received incense for thousands of years. In old legends, when True Martial Mountain once faced a disaster capable of shaking its existence, a sect master used a forbidden secret art to awaken the power hidden within those golden statues. The divine figures marched out with him, and more than 10 immortal sects were destroyed in a single campaign. That was the glory recorded by the mountain. But glory always leaves a shadow. Those who were locked inside the Divine Martial Hall were never simply being punished by walls. Rumor said that on ancient fasting days, days the world no longer properly remembered, the presences within the statues would stir. They would question sinners, punish them. Some even said they could devour a cultivator's soul. Fewer than 1 in 10 who entered for serious crimes came out alive. So when Ma Kuxuan was sent there, the mountain's elders were not merely debating discipline. They were asking a much sharper question. Was True Martial Mountain correcting a dangerous genius, or gambling with the life of its most frightening young talent? In an immortal residence wrapped in spiritual mist, an old militarian grand elder could no longer hold back his rage. In his eyes, the punishment was madness. Ma Kuxuan, for all his cruelty, was a prodigy so rare that even a long-lived cultivator might never meet a second one. To ruin such a seedling would be a crime against the sect itself. Across from him sat the sect leader of True Martial Mountain, a man whose appearance was almost too youthful, too refined, too calm. While the old elder roared, he only arranged a go board, as if the fate of a disciple were merely another endgame problem. That calmness only made the old man angrier. But the sect leader finally spoke, and his meaning was colder than any punishment. Extraordinary disciples had destroyed sects before. That was the truth many elders refused to face. A genius is not automatically a blessing. If a sect bends every ancestral rule for one person, then even if it rises for a moment, that rise may stand on nothing. A pagoda floating in the clouds looks majestic, but without a foundation, one gust of karma can send it crashing down. The old elder argued the other side, and he was not wrong either. In the history of the cultivation world, there were also disciples who carried dying sects back to glory with their own hands. One person, one blade, one unstoppable destiny. Sometimes that was enough to erase 100 years of decline. This was the real disagreement. Not whether Ma Kuxuan had talent. Everyone knew he did. The question was whether true Martial Mountain should become his shield, his servant, and eventually his hostage. The sect leader refused. True Martial Mountain was not yet so desperate that it needed to abandon its laws for a single violent prodigy. If the old elder wanted to give Ma Kuxuan treasures, guidance, and secret help, that was his personal choice. As long as he did not break the sect's rules, the sect leader would not interfere. But the elder pushed further. Wind Snow Temple had Wei Jin of the Divine Platform. That name alone was enough to pressure True Martial Mountain. If their rival ancestral force had such a sword-like figure, then who did True Martial Mountain have? The sect leader smiled faintly. We have me. That one sentence ended the argument more cleanly than any roar. And this is where one must understand the deeper balance between the two military and ancestral forces. Wind Snow Temple was known for individual combat strength. If both sides each sent 10 experts to fight, most people believed Wind Snow Temple would crush True Martial Mountain so badly that the losers would be crying for their ancestors. Yet True Martial Mountain still stood as an ancestral force. Why? Because power is not only measured by how many fierce fighters a sect has. Sometimes, a mountain is held up by one person whose depth others cannot see. The old elder, however, had another reason for protecting Ma Kuxuan. The sect leader exposed it with an almost mocking ease. The elder wanted Ma Kuxuan to grow strong enough to one day seek revenge against Wind Snow Temple on his behalf. The old man did not deny it. At first, that was indeed his motive. But after spending time with Ma Kuxuan, he had truly come to like the boy. In his eyes, even 1,000 of his own descendants could not match Ma Kuxuan's worth. The conversation briefly turned crude and strangely human, as old grudges and personal weaknesses surfaced between senior brothers. Their exchange was sharp, familiar, and almost ridiculous. But beneath the jokes was a serious truth. These were not ordinary elders. Their laughter and insults hid authority, danger, and decades of shared history. Then the old elder shifted the subject back to the sect's atmosphere. He despised how recent disciples reacted to Ma Kuxuan. One boy had appeared, and their hearts were already trembling. They whispered, envied, feared, and complained like people without spine. But the sect leader saw it more clearly. Their Dao hearts had not been shaken by Ma Kuxuan. They had been weak from the beginning. That remark carried the cruelty of a true mountain master. A sect can provide techniques, resources, and shelter, but it cannot digest fear for every disciple. If their hearts collapse merely because someone more brilliant appears beside them, then their path was never firm. Only near the end did the sect leader finally give the reassurance the old elder had come for. Ma Kuxuan would not die. Those simple words changed everything. The old elder's anger vanished at once. His panic had never been about rules. It had been about losing the boy. Yet before he left, the sect leader casually exposed another level of power. With a wave of his hand, he caused the old nascent tier Earth Immortal's belt to crumble without the elder noticing. Only when the old man realized it did he vanish in embarrassment. But the joke was not really a joke. If the sect leader could destroy a belt unnoticed, what else could he have destroyed? A robe? A weapon? A heart meridian? A life? Seen from this angle, the sect leader's earlier confidence was no empty boast. True Martial Mountain might lack the fierce reputation of Wind Snow Temple's battle immortals, but its mountain master was no ordinary piece on the board. After the elder disappeared, the sect leader returned to his vice, go manual. The book recorded famous endgames, and the setup before him came from a legendary match involving White Emperor City's city lord and the former first disciple of the scholarly sage. That detail matters. A man who studies endgames is not only looking at stones, he is looking at timing, sacrifice, hidden traps, and the final shape of victory after all obvious moves have disappeared. And while the elders debated whether Ma Kuxuan was danger or destiny, the boy himself was already inside the divine martial hall. But he did not look like a prisoner. He sat cross-legged atop the head of a towering deity statue, while a black cat rested on his own head. Boy, cat, and god image, a strange little throne in a hall meant to terrify sinners. That black cat was no decoration. It had been with Ma Kuxuan since childhood, and after the death of his grandmother, their bond had become even deeper. In a mountain full of elders, disciples, rules, jealousy, and fear, perhaps that cat was the only companion who had never changed its eyes when looking at him. Then one of the gilded wooden statues moved. Golden light appeared in its eyes. The giant divine figure stepped down from its altar, crossed the hall, and knelt before Ma Kuxuan. Not attacked, not interrogated, knelt. For anyone else, this would have been a miracle, a terror, or a heavenly omen. For Ma Kuxuan, it seemed almost routine. He simply warned the statue to stay quiet after returning. The statue obeyed. This was the hidden reason behind the sect leader's calm. The divine martial hall, which devoured others, did not devour Ma Kuxuan. The ancient presences that punished criminals bowed before him. For cultivators, too much fortune can be as troublesome as too little. A man without opportunity is pitiful, but a young genius drowning in opportunity becomes something even more dangerous, because every treasure, every inheritance, every omen pushes him further away from ordinary human restraint. Ma Kuxuan himself seemed to understand this in his own mocking way. He muttered that having too many immortal treasures and too much good fortune could also become annoying. Then he lay back on the statue. The black cat curled on his chest, and the two of them slept beneath the silent gaze of the golden deities. Outside, people feared him, envied him, judged him, and whispered behind his back. Inside, the gods stood like guards before a young ruler, and Ma Kuxuan's attitude toward the world was simple. If they disliked him, then so be it. He disliked them too. The scene should not be mistaken for peace. It was the quiet of incense smoke rising before a storm. True Martial Mountain thought it had confined Ma Kuxuan, but perhaps the divine martial hall was not a cage for him at all. Perhaps it was the first place where the mountain itself began to reveal what kind of monster or king it had accepted. Far away from that mountain, another thread of karma was unfolding. Zhou, the virtuous scholar of Lakeview Academy, did not accompany his master to complete Reed Continent to visit the Daoist heavenly lord, Xixi. His reason was not fear of travel, nor lack of respect. It was because he knew his own temper. If he met Xixi, he might not be able to stop himself from cursing the man. And if a disciple insults a being like that, the matter no longer belongs to the disciple alone. His master would be dragged into it. His master might not be able to defeat Xixi away from the academy, but neither could he simply watch his disciple be struck down. In that case, would the master have to apologize for him? For a scholar, knowing when not to speak can be its own form of self-restraint. So Zhou went elsewhere. He traveled to a peak near the place where Ceremony Mountain's kunship had fallen. Records said that the terrifying sword Kith had destroyed the southbound vessel had erupted from that area. The result had been disastrous. Those beneath the middle 5 tiers had nearly all perished. Zhou arched the mountain. He found nothing, no lingering trace, Nubius sword mark, no clean evidence left behind. But that lack of evidence did not confuse him. In fact, it confirmed something. This was not a simple attack. Someone had cleaned the board. Someone had arranged the pieces. Someone was trying to frame a powerful empire of Eastern treasured vile continent, and they were doing it with terrifying confidence. Yet one thing still troubled Zhou. Why would Xixi, a mighty Dao lord from complete Reed Continent, lower himself into this muddy game? Why take action in a way that placed pressure on Lakeview Academy? If the matter continued, Xixi might turn himself into the enemy of countless qi refiners across Eastern treasured vile continent. Was he truly acting as though he were the second disciple of the Dao ancestor? Zhou did not believe the Great Li Empire's Song clan had enough weight to command such a figure. That made the situation even more dangerous. When a great being acts without an obvious price, the hidden price is usually far heavier. After spending several days in the wilderness, Zhou prepared to leave, but his thoughts drifted to another matter his master had mentioned. Across southern Whirl Continent, Parasol Leaf Continent, and circling Ascension Continent, ownerless immortal treasures that had long been lost were suddenly appearing again. Not just ordinary treasures either. Among them were traces of pseudo-celestial tools. In the cultivation world, such news is never merely good fortune. It is bait, storm, and battlefield all at once. Vagrant cultivators would swarm like hungry wolves. Ancient clans and established sects would not stand aside. Temporary alliances would form. Betrayals would follow. Blood would be spilled for objects that might change the fate of a single cultivator, a lineage, or even a continent. But Zhou was not excited. He was a scholar, and what he saw was not opportunity, but disorder. Once the world became noisy, it would become harder for scholars to study in peace. And to Zhou, that was no small matter. A world where reading becomes difficult is already a world beginning to tilt. He looked up at the sky with quiet frustration. If even he, a mere virtuous scholar of Lakeview Academy, could sense traces beneath the surface, then what about those beings standing far above his master? Were they watching? Were they waiting? Or were they already moving pieces that lesser people could not even see? With those thoughts pressing on him, Zhou descended the mountain. Sometimes he rode the wind. Sometimes he simply walked. In the end, he entered a lively market and ordered a steaming bowl of hot and sour soup. One bowl was enough to wash away much of his irritation. That is the strange balance of the human world. Heavenly lords may scheme, empires may be framed, immortal treasures may rise across continents, but a scholar's heart can still be softened by warmth, spice, and the ordinary life of a small market. The stall owner's daughter, young and bright, secretly stole glances at him. In her hometown, scholars were rare. Handsome scholars were rarer still. To her, even one more look felt worthwhile. Zhou noticed enough to understand, but not enough to ruin the moment. So he ordered another bowl. And there, between the smoke of soup and the dust of the mortal world, the great storm seemed far away for just a breath. But only for a breath. Because elsewhere, incense still rose before ancient statues. A dangerous young prodigy slept beneath the gaze of gods. A fallen Kun ship still had no true culprit. Lost treasures were surfacing across 3 continents. And above it all, unseen hands were moving through the clouds. For cultivators and scholars alike, peace was becoming thinner by the day. And when the next gust of fate arrived, no one could say whether it would carry opportunity or calamity. A young cultivator may fear blades, ghosts, and heavenly tribulation. But sometimes the most dangerous thing on the road is a smiling stranger who refuses to leave. Before Chen Ping'an boarded the treasure-swallowing whale bound for Parasol Leaf Continent, he made one last stop near the incense offering tower. There, he spent real money on something most travelers would have walked past without a second glance. A tube of 3 pure incense, 81 sticks in all, born from Stalactite Mountain's own specialty craft. Now, to ordinary eyes, this was just expensive incense. 1 lesser heat coin for a single tube, a price that could make even seasoned wanderers hesitate. But Chen Ping'an was not buying fragrance. He was thinking of home. He remembered the mountain god temple on Downtrodden Mountain and imagined a future day when friends might visit. If they offered incense there with sincere hearts, then the mountain god would receive good incense, and his friends would leave behind good karma. In the cultivation world, this kind of thought looks small, but it reveals the foundation of a person's Dao Heart. Chen Ping'an was never someone who spent money easily, so when he did spend, it was often for memory, gratitude, or responsibility. And this trip was not light on spending. Besides the treasures he had already bought at Ganoderma Inn, he also purchased a copied set of Sword Immortal picture scrolls, 5 long scrolls. 100 Sword Immortals. Each figure was tiny, yet painted with enough spirit that they seemed almost ready to step out with sword chi around them. This was not the original, of course. The true scrolls had been created after a master painter witnessed a great battle at the Sword Chi Great Wall. Since then, countless copies had spread through the world. But even copies had grades. Chen Ping'an compared several versions and finally chose the Rock Channel edition, the most expensive one there. Why? Because the sword immortals inside that version resonated with him most. 50 lesser heat coins vanished just like that. For many cultivators, this might have been a foolish purchase. But the shopkeeper, whether out of genuine appreciation or because he saw a generous customer, told Chen Ping'an strange stories about the scrolls. There were sword cultivators who had once seen damaged fragments of the original paintings, grasped hidden sword intent from them, and later rose to become famous terrestrial sword immortals. Whether those tales were true or polished by merchants, they still carried one important meaning. In this world, even a painting could become an opportunity if one's eyes and fate were sharp enough. Chen Ping'an did not buy the scrolls for himself alone. He planned to bring them back as a congratulatory gift for Ruan Qiang. When Chen Ping'an had left Dragon Spring Prefecture, Master Ruan had not yet held his sect founding ceremony. By now, that ceremony had most likely passed. To Ruan Qiang, the money value was nothing. But a gift carried across thousands of mountains and rivers from Stalactite Mountain back to Dragon Spring Prefecture had a different weight. Sometimes, sincerity travels farther than treasure. After leaving the market, Chen Ping'an headed toward the incense offering dock. And here, something amusing happened. After changing his clothes and looking more refined than before, Chen Ping'an actually drew repeated glances from several young female immortals. Not the careless kind of glance, either. These were second and third looks. But Chen Ping'an had no mood for vanity. Compared with his earlier journey to Stalactite Mountain to deliver a sword to Ning Yao, this next journey weighed differently on his heart. He was going to Parasol Leaf Continent to search for the old Daoist priest. Once he confirmed those women had no ill intent, he pushed the matter aside. A cultivator who is chasing answers has no time to be distracted by admiring eyes. The incense offering dock was grander than the catch and release dock, yet Chen Ping'an could not see the treasure-swallowing whale anywhere. Instead, he saw wonders that reminded him how vast the world truly was. There was a mountain and sea turtle carrying courtyards and towers upon its back. There was a great carriage drawn by an azure phoenix and a celestial crane. There was also a small green mountain peak, something recorded in the Mountain and Sea Chronicle as a rare object from circling Ascension Continent. Chen Ping'an wondered whether it was a flying over mountain or a flying away peak. Such mountains were said to nourish flood dragons during their dangerous transformation into true dragons. In ancient times, when flood dragons entered rivers to seek the sea, they would have these mountain peaks thrown into the water, using the spiritual roots inside as fuel, so they would not exhaust their chi and blood halfway. This was the cultivation world's cruelty and splendor in one breath. Even a mountain could be medicine. Even a river could become a dragon gate. But Chen Ping'an had a practical problem. His command of Middle-earth Divine Continent's official dialect was still poor. Asking for directions might turn into a disaster of confusion. If no one understood him, he would have to carve questions onto bamboo slips. Fortunately, he noticed other passengers wearing jade pendants like his own, so he followed quietly. Soon, he reached a more crowded boarding area and finally relaxed a little. Then someone tapped his left shoulder. Chen Ping'an turned to the right instead. There stood a familiar face, beautiful, strange, and troublesome. The person wore a pearl hairpin, a pink dress, and a colorful ribbon. At first glance, one might think this was a stunning young woman. But Chen Ping'an knew better. This was the young man surnamed Lu, the same person who had once been thrown out of the incense offering tower by the young Daoist priest guarding the entrance. If their earlier meeting on Osmanthus Island could be blamed on coincidence, then meeting again here, on the same intercontinental route to Planchette Writing Sect, was far harder to dismiss. Lu Tai noticed Chen Ping'an's caution at once. Instead of hiding anything, he patted his own boarding jade pendant and admitted that Chen Ping'an's suspicion was basically correct. He had been waiting. That kind of honesty was almost more suspicious than a lie. Chen Ping'an's impression of Lu Tai had never been hatred, but it was far from trust. Lu Tai was lively, unpredictable, and dressed in a way that made people stare. Chen Ping'an did not judge him for that, but he also did not want such a person disturbing the peaceful routine he planned for the voyage. Fist practice, sword practice, quiet travel, no unnecessary trouble. Lu Tai introduced himself properly. His name was Lu Tai, a descendant of the Lu clan from Middle-earth Divine Continent. According to him, he was not favored in his clan, so he had left home to wander. He claimed to have traveled 5 of the 9 continents and said he had not originally intended to go to Parasol Leaf Continent at all. Then came the shameless part. He said he was short on money, looking for someone kind enough to provide food and shelter, but not the type to covet his beauty. And after careful judgment, he had decided Chen Ping'an was perfect. In other words, he wanted to cling to him. Chen Ping'an's face made it very clear he did not believe a word. So Lu Tai changed tactics and revealed a second truth. He said he came from the school of naturalists and was skilled in divination. He truly was short on funds, but not incapable of earning money. More importantly, he had recently divined his own fortune. Travel east on the treasure swallower. Meet nobility in Parasol Leaf Continent. Upper fortune. That was the sign. To avoid mistakes, Lu Tai had waited 20 days. Only when Chen Ping'an appeared did he feel the omen had landed. In Lu Tai's telling, even his ancestors' protection was involved, and refusing to go would invite heavenly retribution. Chen Ping'an did not curse him. He did not lose his temper. He simply tried to negotiate like a sensible person. He would not stop Lu Tai from going to Parasol Leaf Continent. He could not stop him anyway. But could they please travel separately? If money was the issue, Chen Ping'an was even willing to lend him some lesser heat coins. Then Lu Tai interrupted with a request that made Chen Ping'an's scalp go numb. Do not call him Young Master Lu. Call him Miss Lu, because otherwise people might look at him strangely. At that moment, Chen Ping'an probably wondered what kind of logic the heavens had allowed into the world. This person was worried about strangers looking strangely at him, yet showed no concern at all for what Chen Ping'an himself might think. Lu Tai then began pleading, acting pitiful, even swearing dramatic oaths that if he meant Chen Ping'an harm, he should be punished by heavenly lightning, buried beneath a mountain, sealed in a dragon palace furnace, or exiled into some empty mystical realm. The oath grew more and more ridiculous. Then he reached out to grab Chen Ping'an's arm. Chen Ping'an slapped the hand away at once. His warning was firm. Miss Lu, please conduct yourself with dignity. That line was not merely politeness. It was Chen Ping'an drawing a boundary, but boundaries are only useful against people who respect them. Lu Tai did not. When Chen Ping'an walked away, Lu Tai followed. When Chen Ping'an stopped, Lu Tai stopped. When Chen Ping'an turned, Lu Tai turned. At some point, Lu Tai even took out a small copper mirror and powder, calmly touching up his appearance like a noble beauty preparing for an outing. Chen Ping'an was horrified. The surrounding crowd, however, found the whole thing entertaining. Some male cultivators looked over with open longing. Even old golden core and nascent soul experts, who clearly saw through Lu Tai's disguise and knew he was male, still watched with heated eyes. This is one of those truths younger cultivators often learn too late. After living long enough, some old monsters no longer care about ordinary taboos. Lu Tai followed behind Chen Ping'an like an abandoned young wife, silent and wronged, making Chen Ping'an look like the heartless villain in a drama he never agreed to join. And Chen Ping'an had no idea how to deal with it. At the front of the boarding area, people were vanishing one after another. Only then did Chen Ping'an understand where the treasure-swallowing whale truly was. The boarding points were not gangplanks or gates. They were embroidered brocade rugs spread across the ground. When he had bought his boarding pendant, there had been 3 residential choices: Cloud on Peak, Enchanting Garden, and Emerald Lake. Chen Ping'an had chosen Emerald Lake, the middle option. Now he saw the 3 embroidered paths before him, one showing clouds around a lone peak, one showing an emerald lake with residences scattered like stars, and one showing flower-filled courtyards and pagodas. Behind him, Lu Tai explained softly that passengers did not enter the treasure-swallowing whale through its mouth. This whale was enormous, considered the largest of its kind in Golden Armor Continent. Inside it were 4 separate mystical realms, 3 of which served as residences for passengers. Compared with it, the treasure-swallowing whale from Old Dragon City, which held only 1 mystical realm, was far inferior. And those embroidered rugs? They were high-grade land-shortening talismans meant to send passengers directly into the correct internal realm. Chen Ping'an immediately understood. He had studied mystical realms carefully in the Mountain and Sea Chronicle. Because mystical realms were connected to blessed lands, and because Jewel's small world had once fallen and shattered, he had paid special attention to this topic. He had even asked the young manager of Stork Inn about details not written in the book. People born in Stalactite Mountain were different. No matter their cultivation level or family background, they had seen and heard too much. They could speak of sages, heavenly lords, earth immortals, and ancient secrets with a confidence outsiders rarely possessed. From those conversations, Chen Ping'an had learned that when blessed lands aged, collapsed, or were destroyed, fragments of territory could remain behind. These fragments became mystical realms. Some were full of spiritual plants and life essence. Some were poisonous wastelands. Some were abandoned cave abodes of dead sages. Some became places where cultivators rose overnight. Others became cages where unlucky wanderers died and left their belongings for the next fated fool. For cultivators, mystical realms are dreams and graves wearing the same face. Chen Ping'an could not help thinking of Jewel's small world. After it fell apart, had any mystical realm survived? That question had no answer for now. Perhaps, when he returned home, he could ask Weibo. With those thoughts still turning in his mind, Chen Ping'an stepped toward the embroidery leading to Emerald Lake. But Lu Tai moved faster and blocked him. This time, Lu Tai looked wounded and noble, as if making a painful sacrifice. He said that he had originally planned to stay in Emerald Lake as well, but since Chen Ping'an disliked him so much, he would not be a burden. He would instead pay extra and move to the more prestigious Enchanting Garden. Of course, there was one small problem. He needed money. Chen Ping'an did not hesitate. He took out a handful of lesser heat coins and handed them over. This was not generosity. This was paying to avoid calamity. If a few coins could buy peace, quiet, and distance from Lu Tai, Chen Ping'an was willing. He only wanted to spend the voyage training his fist and sword techniques in peace. Lu Tai accepted the money with eyes full of grievance, stared at Chen Ping'an as if deeply hurt, then turned and left. Chen Ping'an finally stepped onto the land-shortening talisman. For one brief breath, it seemed the problem had been solved. Then he looked up. From not far away, Lu Tai winked at him with delight and waved a jade pendant engraved with the words, Emerald Lake. Only then did Chen Ping'an understand. Lu Tai had never been upgrading to Enchanting Garden. He had originally bought the cheapest Cloud on Peak ticket because he truly lacked money. Everything else, the wounded expression, the pitiful farewell, the noble sacrifice, had been bait. And Chen Ping'an had paid for Lu Tai to move into the same mystical realm as him. As Lu Tai walked over lightly, smug and radiant, Chen Ping'an vanished from the ferry station with only one thought burning in his heart. This journey to Parasol Leaf Continent had not even begun. And already, trouble had boarded the ship with him. A calm lake is not always a place of peace. Sometimes it is only a polished mirror hiding currents of karma beneath the surface. When Chen Ping'an stepped onto the platform in the heart of Emerald Lake, what greeted him was not danger in the ordinary sense. There were no swords drawn, no demons roaring, no murderous cultivators blocking his path. Instead, there was mist rising from the water, pagodas floating like immortal dwellings, narrow paths linking one pavilion to another, and small boats waiting beside each residence, as if this shattered realm existed only for leisure. But those who have walked the cultivation path know this well. The gentler a place appears, the more carefully one must weigh every encounter. The treasure-swallowing whale had arranged everything with the elegance of a wealthy immortal fairy. Young attendants in green dresses guided guests across the lake, and the pagoda assigned to Chen Ping'an was called Lingering Shade Mountain Pagoda. It was spacious, 3 stories tall, and more than enough for one person. The seller had even suggested that Chen Ping'an share it with others to reduce the price. For many wandering cultivators, that would have been a sensible choice. Spirit money is not easy to earn, and on the path of cultivation, even a temporary neighbor may one day become a useful connection. A cup of tea today may become a life-saving favor tomorrow. That is how karma often hides itself. But Chen Ping'an chose to live alone. This was not arrogance, it was habit, caution, and temperament. Ever since his earliest days, he had grown used to carrying matters by himself. From the dragon kiln to long journeys across unfamiliar lands, whether the trouble was small or large, he had always endured it directly. Ordinary hardship did not frighten him. What troubled him was the kind of problem that had no clear shape. And that problem soon appeared again. As Chen Ping'an followed the path away from the central platform, immortals passed above him by sword and wind. Then Lu Tai arrived beside him, graceful, playful, and impossible to ignore. This young master from the Lu clan of Middle-earth Divine Continent looked harmless at first glance, nothing like Fu Nanhua or Kui Chan, who carried pressure like dark clouds over the heart. Yet Chen Ping'an did not judge danger only by aura. That is an important lesson. A blade that shines openly is often easier to avoid than a thread of fate wrapped around the wrist. He had already learned something about the weight of great clans on Stalactite Mountain. When he heard that Sword Reverence Pagoda stood near the Lu clan's Ape Havoc estate, he understood the kind of influence pure White Continent's Lu clan possessed. Because of that, even though he had a good impression of Lu Yuzhou, Chen Ping'an instinctively drew a line between them. It was not coldness, it was self-preservation. A poor youth from Jewel Small World could not afford to treat every great clan connection as fortune. Lu Tai, however, did not seem interested in distance. He followed Chen Ping'an with a smile, teasing him about being petty. Speaking of magnanimity, fortune, and even Confucian sayings, Chen Ping'an finally stopped and asked the question that mattered. Why was Lu Tai following him? Lu Tai's answer sounded like nonsense. But in the cultivation world, nonsense is spoken by a naturalist is often more dangerous than a straightforward lie. He claimed the divination of excellent fortune was connected to Chen Ping'an because the grain rain coin used for the divination had come from him. Chen Ping'an corrected him immediately. The coin had not been given. It had only been lent. That one correction reveals a great deal about Chen Ping'an. Some cultivators speak of fate and opportunity until debts become blurred. Chen Ping'an did not. A borrowed coin was a borrowed coin. Even before immortals, before ancient inheritances, before mysterious divinations, he still kept accounts clearly. Lu Tai then tried another route. He offered to trade an immortal treasure for more grain rain coins. Chen Ping'an refused without hesitation. The debt could remain a debt. He had no interest in being pulled deeper into Lu Tai's game through profit. Lu Tai acted wronged, as though Chen Ping'an were treating him like a monster. He spoke of traveling together, enjoying mountains and rivers, and meeting a fated friend on the cultivation path. But Chen Ping'an only felt a headache coming. Some matters can be solved with reason. Others cannot. Lu Tai clearly belonged to the second kind. As they walked, Lu Tai began explaining the origin of Emerald Lake. This realm had once been part of Hanging Flower Blessed Land, a place owned by a female immortal who loved collecting spring water from across the world. But when she attempted to step into the Ascension tier, she failed. Her fall did not end with her death alone. The backlash of the heavenly Dao shattered the blessed land itself, scattering fragments across the world. Emerald Lake was one of those fragments. Seen from this angle, the lake was not merely a scenic stop for wealthy travelers. It was a ruin left behind by failed ascension. Its beauty came from calamity. Its famous waters still carried traces of the spring essence that female immortal had once gathered. And those with the right eye could draw from hidden water veins to brew tea of extraordinary quality. That is the way of cultivation. One person's heavenly tribulation becomes another person's tourist attraction. One immortal's destroyed blessed land becomes another cultivator's brief lodging. Chen Ping'an listened without much response and continued forward until lingering Shade Mountain Pagoda came into view. It stood beside jade railings, walkways, and a small dock with 2 boats. Not far away, lotus flowers spread across the water, while young women rode through the blossoms and sang soft songs as they harvested lotus seeds. It should have been a perfect place for quiet cultivation. So Chen Ping'an stopped and made his meaning clear. He had arrived, and he would not be inviting Lu Tai inside. If there was time later, he might visit Lu Tai's residence instead. Then came the trouble. Lu Tai pointed at lingering Shade Mountain Pagoda. At first, Chen Ping'an thought he was joking. But Lu Tai showed a handful of lesser heat coins and explained that he had sold his own place to a wealthy immortal. Since their relationship was supposedly so good, he had assumed Chen Ping'an would give him somewhere to stay. At this moment, even a patient person like Chen Ping'an darkened in expression. Lu Tai hurriedly promised not to disturb his cultivation. He could sleep on a small boat if needed. He had food. He would not enter the pagoda unless something urgent happened. He even wrapped hardship in the language of cultivation, as if imposing on someone else were a noble test of endurance. This was shamelessness refined into an art. But then Lu Tai finally dropped the act. He admitted that his excellent fortune divination for the trip to Parasol Leaf Continent was not centered on ordinary treasures. It was tied to the phrase, observing Dao on the ascending sun platform. More importantly, he believed that by traveling with Chen Ping'an and borrowing the state of Chen Ping'an's mind, he could temper his own Dao Heart. In other words, Lu Tai was not chasing a treasure chest, he was chasing a living whetstone. He even described it as borrowing from another mountain to polish jade, then jokingly corrected himself, as if to soften the sharpness of what he had just revealed. Chen Ping'an did not focus on the joke, he focused on the meaning. On one hand, this gave him some relief. Lu Tai's pursuit was likely not a trap designed specifically against him. On the other hand, it created a new worry. Chen Ping'an was traveling to Parasol Leaf Continent to search for a Daoist temple and an old Daoist priest. That matter was already wrapped in uncertainty. Now a mysterious naturalist disciple wanted to attach himself to the journey. A cultivator does not fear one extra pair of chopsticks at the table. He fears one extra strand of karma tied to his fate. Lu Tai seemed to understand that Chen Ping'an's caution would obstruct his own opportunity. So he offered something serious. One sincere fortune-telling. He claimed his divinations were accurate as long as the matter did not involve beings too powerful. If it touched upper five-tier immortals, the backlash would be painful beyond measure. For many cultivators, such an offer would be irresistible. Who does not want to glimpse fortune? Who does not want to avoid calamity before it descends? But Chen Ping'an declined. This was not because he lacked curiosity. It was because he understood that some knowledge carries a price even before it becomes useful. To know too much can disturb the heart. To rely too much on prophecy can weaken one's steps. So he simply allowed Lu Tai to stay in Lingering Shade Mountain Pagoda, with one condition. Each would cultivate separately, and neither would interfere with the other. Lu Tai watched him leave with a strange expression, as if something had clicked into place. Then he followed. In the end, Chen Ping'an took the first floor, Lu Tai chose the third, and the second floor remained between them like an unspoken boundary. Lu Tai lounged upstairs, amused by the arrangement, even joking inwardly about keeping proper distance. Chen Ping'an, meanwhile, accepted the situation as it was. Since Lu Tai insisted on following him, then forcing the matter might only make the karma more tangled. Better to give him lodging, set boundaries, and continue walking his own path. That is a kind of wisdom, too. Not every annoyance must be cut down with a sword. Once settled, Chen Ping'an returned to what mattered most: cultivation, study, and preparation. Aside from the sword lasting chi on his back and the sword-nurturing gourd at his waist, he carried little on his person. But from 15th, he took out the books that would shape his days. The Mountain and Sea Chronicle, an immortal book, language texts for Middle-earth Divine Continent and Parasol Leaf Continent, and the travel journal he had obtained in colorful Garment Nation. He also prepared precious bamboo slips from Bamboo Sea Small World, intending to carve meaningful passages as he read. His schedule became disciplined and clear. In the morning, he practiced the mountain-shaking fist. In the afternoon, he trained according to the proper sword scripture. At night, he read and studied the official dialects of 2 continents. This may sound simple, but for cultivators, consistency is often more terrifying than sudden brilliance. A single lucky encounter can lift a man once. Daily discipline can carry him through a lifetime of storms. Chen Ping'an also noticed something strange about Emerald Lake. It was a shattered mystical realm. Yet the sun and moon still rose and fell. Their reflections shimmered across the lake as if the realm obeyed the rhythm of the outside world. Was this a grand illusion left by an immortal? Or was it a unique rule preserved from the broken blessed land? He did not know, but he observed. Observation is also cultivation. On the walkways around the pagoda, he practiced walking meditation. The breeze carried the fragrance of lotus flowers. Songs drifted from the boats where girls harvested seeds. Against that peaceful background, a young man in white calmly threw punches. But peace did not mean idleness. In the afternoons, Chen Ping'an practiced sword techniques on the first floor. He did not go outside, and he did not draw the sword on his back. He continued using an imaginary sword, because lasting qi itself was tempering his soul. Keeping it on his back was already a form of cultivation. Even at night, he did not remove it, choosing instead to sleep on his side. The sword-nurturing gourd was hung before the bed. Since he no longer drank as often, there was no need to keep it constantly at his waist. Meanwhile, his bond with the flying swords 1st and 15th continued to deepen. After traveling together across tens of thousands of kilometers, the connection between them had grown more natural, almost as if the swords themselves were slowly gaining greater awareness. Commands became smoother. Understanding became sharper. When Chen Ping'an slept, he entrusted them with guarding the building. 1st did not exactly agree, but it did not refuse. 15th, gentler by nature, seemed happy to accept. For a sword cultivator, this kind of tacit understanding is not a small matter. A flying sword that obeys is useful. A flying sword that understands is deadly. At night, while reading, Chen Ping'an sometimes opened the authentic death-avoiding book. After reaching the 4th tier, he discovered that 2 new talismans were now within his ability to attempt. The first was the Mountain and River Sword Edict Talisman, a defensive talisman with vague but weighty origins. The book spoke of mountain in a cryptic way, linked to the mountain of 3 mountains, and described river through the image of a divine being who ruled waters, punished evil, and devoured ghosts. The second was the rain-praying talisman, an altar talisman capable of summoning dark clouds and heavy rain, usually associated with powerful Daoist talisman masters. Chen Ping'an cared far more about the Sword Edict talisman. This choice also reveals his path. Rain has its uses, and altar arts have their mysteries, but Chen Ping'an was not seeking grand display. He valued protection, sword intent, and practical survival. So he took ordinary yellow talisman paper and attempted the Sword Edict talisman with great seriousness. It was not easy. After entering the 3 qi tempering tiers of martial arts, his soul had become more stable, purer, and stronger. At times, he could even hear faint sounds like water dripping as his 3 souls passed by the lake of his mind. Because of that improvement, he could sense the flaw in his own talisman. The form was there, but the mental intent was lacking. This was a subtle but important bottleneck. In talisman arts, the brush line is only the body. Intent is the spirit. Without enough intent, even a correct talisman may be like a sword without killing power. Chen Ping'an wanted to know how strong the talisman truly was, but because Lu Tai was upstairs, he chose not to test it carelessly. This was caution again, but not fear. In a shared residence, even temporary, reckless testing could create unnecessary consequences. 10 days passed like this. Sometimes, Chen Ping'an heard faint footsteps from the 2nd floor. They were rare, and Lu Tai never came down to disturb him. The boundary remained intact. Only then did Chen Ping'an feel slightly more at ease. This fated encounter had crashed into his path without warning. If it was not an ill omen, then that was already enough. He would not force benefit from it. He would not chase Lu Tai's divination, nor greedily dig at this strange connection. Because Chen Ping'an's way had always been different from those cultivators who grab every shining opportunity with both hands. He would practice his fist. He would polish his sword. He would study languages for the road ahead. He would draw talismans, nourish flying swords, and keep his heart steady. Yet beyond the quiet lake, beyond the lotus songs and drifting mist, the phrase Lu Tai had spoken still lingered like an unopened gate, observing Dao on the ascending sun platform. For now, it was only a clue. But in the cultivation world, a clue can become a path can become a trial, and a trial can decide whether a cultivator rises into clear sky or falls into the shattered remains of someone else's failed ascension. A talisman drawn with imperfect hands can expose more than poor technique. Sometimes, one sheet of paper is enough to reveal a cultivator's path, his poverty-born habits, his hidden fortune, and the regrets he still carries from home. That night, Chen Ping'an completed his 2nd Sword Edict talisman. To an ordinary eye, perhaps it already looked decent. The strokes were present, the meaning was there, and the talisman could probably be used. But Chen Ping'an was not the kind of person who comforted himself with good enough. He looked at his own work the way an old potter studies a fired vessel. Outsiders might see no difference between two pieces of pottery, but a true craftsman can tell which one carries life and which one merely holds shape. And so, dissatisfaction settled in his heart. His thoughts drifted toward the ancient battlefield ruins he had once considered. Perhaps only by facing heroic spirits, by clashing against the remnants of warriors who had died with their wills unbroken, could he polish his fourth-tier martial foundation to a purer edge. And perhaps only then could his talismans stop feeling like borrowed tricks and begin to carry real authority. For a martial artist, this was a dangerous temptation. A pure martial artist should sharpen fist intent, breath, body, and courage. But Chen Ping'an had always been strange. He carried flying swords, studied books late into the night, and now he was drawing talismans like a half-step Daoist cultivator who had wandered into the wrong temple. While he was still weighing these thoughts, Lu Tai appeared. He came down from above, stopped on the stairs, and tapped the wall as if announcing himself at a door. Chen Ping'an instinctively moved to hide the talisman, but Lu Tai had already seen enough. To Lu Tai, that sheet of paper was not some mysterious treasure beyond comprehension. It was an old defensive talisman, one whose lineage had nearly vanished from the world. Its rank was not especially high, but its beauty lay in simplicity. It had returned to a kind of raw, ancient purity. And that was exactly why Lu Tai looked pained. He told Chen Ping'an, in that smiling way of his, that seeing such a thing handled so clumsily nearly made his heart ache. Not because the talisman was worthless, but because it was valuable in a way Chen Ping'an did not yet understand. This was not merely mockery. Hidden beneath Lu Tai's teasing was a lesson from a vast clan scripture library. First, Chen Ping'an was a martial artist trying to draw a talisman that belonged to a refined and ancient branch of cultivation. Second, he was leaning too heavily on his brush and materials rather than real talismanic comprehension. His destination might be correct, but the road he walked was crooked, uneven, and wasteful. Third, and most painful of all, the paper beneath those strokes was far too precious to be treated like ordinary practice material. Lu Tai identified it as returning to spring talisman paper. Now, this detail mattered. Such paper was not just expensive because rich people liked rare names. Its value came from function. When a proper talisman was drawn on it, that talisman could often be used again and again. Unless the talisman was designed purely for violent destruction, the finest talismans in the world were rarely one-breath consumables. They were tools refined for endurance. But Chen Ping'an, without knowing better, had been using this treasure as if it were firewood. Seen from this angle, Lu Tai's ridicule was not empty. Chen Ping'an had been burning money, and worse, burning opportunity. To a cultivator, wasted resources are sometimes more painful than defeat. Defeat can sharpen a person. Waste only leaves regret. Chen Ping'an did not immediately accept or reject Lu Tai's words. That was his habit. He first judged whether the words were true, then whether they were useful. But Lu Tai was too mysterious, too learned, and too difficult to measure. So Chen Ping'an could only listen carefully while guarding his heart. When Lu Tai asked to examine the back of the talisman, Chen Ping'an hesitated before allowing it. Even that small action showed his nature. He was cautious, but not closed-minded. He did not trust easily, yet he would not refuse knowledge merely because it came wrapped in mockery. Lu Tai confirmed the paper's origin and continued to explain. Pure martial artists at the upper tiers could, in theory, draw powerful talismans with a single unbroken breath of true qi. But martial artists who reached that height usually had wills like iron and paths as clear as mountain ridges. Such people would not suddenly abandon their fists to become talisman masters. That made Chen Ping'an even stranger. A martial artist drawing talismans. A young man carrying a sword nurturing gourd. A reader who studied every night as if books were also part of cultivation. In Lu Tai's eyes, Chen Ping'an was walking too many roads at once. Was this breadth or confusion? Was it destiny or distraction? Chen Ping'an did not answer. He simply put away the sword edict talisman and returned to his reading. Sometimes silence is not defeat. For Chen Ping'an, silence was often how he stored a lesson for later. After that, life aboard the treasure-swallowing whale continued in its strange, luxurious rhythm. Lu Tai would leave the lingering Shade Mountain Pagoda from time to time, rowing across Emerald Lake or visiting the treasure chambers hidden within the great ship. And one must understand, a treasure-swallowing whale was not named lightly. In its long existence, it swallowed wrecked treasure ships from the deep sea, ships that once crossed continents, ships that carried rare cargo, ancient relics, and perhaps even remnants of fallen immortals. For ordinary travelers, such a vessel was transportation. For those with eyes and money, it was a moving treasury. Lu Tai behaved exactly like someone born to wander such places. One afternoon, he brought out an entire set of tea instruments from his pocket treasure, so many pieces that the ritual itself seemed excessive. Then he used a secret art to draw out the essence of spring water from Emerald Lake and brewed tea in the corridor. The fragrance spread beautifully. Chen Ping'an did not ask for a cup. He continued practicing sword techniques inside the pagoda. This difference between them was almost amusing. Lu Tai enjoyed beauty, leisure, and refinement as if they were natural extensions of cultivation. Chen Ping'an treated time like a debt that must be repaid with practice. Day after day, Lu Tai brewed tea outside and watched the lake. Day after day, Chen Ping'an trained. Then, just before noon on one particular day, as Chen Ping'an was nearly finished with his walking meditation, Lu Tai returned by boat. He came back carrying boxes of makeup. Not far from the lake platform stood several pagoda-like shops operated by the intercontinental ship. These places existed to make wealthy travelers even poorer. Chen Ping'an had visited once and decided almost immediately that the prices were outrageous, even worse than comparable goods in Stalactite Mountain. After that, he lost interest. Lu Tai, however, seemed delighted. He leapt lightly onto the corridor, sat on the white jade railing, opened one of the makeup boxes, and took out a small copper mirror. Then, with calm and elegant movements, he began touching up his appearance. Chen Ping'an continued his walking meditation. Lu Tai asked whether the makeup looked good. Chen Ping'an gave no answer. Lu Tai asked whether the color was too bright, whether his eyebrows should be thinner, whether using a delicate hairpin to scoop the powder made the result more natural. Chen Ping'an still did not answer. This was not just teasing. Lu Tai was testing something. In the cultivation world, people judge power openly and difference quietly. A strange sword, a strange robe, a strange habit, a strange way of living. Any one of these can become a reason for ridicule. Lu Tai, with his beauty, his makeup, and his careless elegance, was asking a question deeper than cosmetics. When Chen Ping'an finally finished his planned practice and prepared to enter the pagoda, Lu Tai stopped looking at the mirror and gazed instead toward the lotus leaves. Then he asked whether a man like him seemed laughable, whether Chen Ping'an felt disgust somewhere deep inside. This time, Chen Ping'an stopped. He did not respond with quick comfort. He did not flatter Lu Tai. He turned back, walked over, and sat on the railing several paces away, facing the lake just as Lu Tai did. That action mattered more than a polite answer. Chen Ping'an was not good at smooth words, but he understood how to stand beside someone without making them feel like a spectacle. Lu Tai picked up one box of makeup, judged it unworthy of its name, and casually tossed it into Emerald Lake. Only then did Chen Ping'an speak. He asked how much it had cost. Lu Tai said it was not too expensive, just one lesser heat coin. It was a famous new product, supposedly favored by renowned celestial maidens from Middle-earth Divine Continent. Perhaps, he admitted, he had been fooled by clever merchants. But to Chen Ping'an, that price carried weight. One lesser heat coin meant 100 snowflake coins, 100,000 taels of silver. A number large enough to make ordinary people freeze in disbelief. And here was the difference between worlds. To Lu Tai, the makeup was a disappointing purchase. Light enough to throw into a lake. To someone from a poor alley, such a thing was nearly beyond imagination. Chen Ping'an said that even a fortune might not be enough to buy happiness. Maybe that box was not expensive to Lu Tai. But there were people who, if they heard such makeup existed, would stare in wonder and refuse to believe it. Lu Tai did not understand at first. So Chen Ping'an told him about a person from his hometown. He did not speak dramatically. He did not decorate the memory with false sorrow. He simply described a man who had lived differently from others and had suffered for it. That man was nothing like Lu Tai. He was not breathtakingly beautiful. He did not have immortal bearing. He did not know elegant makeup styles, did not know how to apply colors with refined technique. And after a day of work, his hands still carried the grime of labor. Yet every morning, he still tried to make himself presentable in the way his heart desired. To outsiders, perhaps he was strange. Even Chen Ping'an admitted that he had once thought so too. This is where the story became heavy. Not because of grand sect battles, not because of flying swords or immortal treasures, but because of a regret that no cultivation art could undo. That person had once asked Chen Ping'an to keep a box of makeup for him, saying he was afraid he might not be able to stop himself from using it again. Chen Ping'an, young and stubborn at the time, refused. He refused more than once. Later, that man was gone, and no one knew where the box went. Worse still, no one cared enough to ask. The terrifying part of some karma is that it does not arrive with thunder. It sits quietly in the heart for years. Chen Ping'an looked at Lu Tai and asked why he had thrown away such an expensive thing. Lu Tai tilted his head, pearl hairpins shifting with the movement, and answered lightly. Perhaps he should have given it to Chen Ping'an instead. Then one day, Chen Ping'an could bring it home, place it before that person's resting place, and tell him that such exquisite makeup truly existed in the world. He could wish for that person to be reborn into a better life, one where they could use as much makeup as they wanted and never worry about money. It sounded playful, but beneath the playfulness was a rare gentleness. Chen Ping'an turned back toward the lake and shook his head. He could not even find that person's grave. So how could he bring the makeup there? How could he say those words? And just like that, the matter ended without resolution. No sword was drawn. No talisman was activated. No enemy appeared on Emerald Lake. Yet for Chen Ping'an, this quiet conversation cut deeper than many battles. Because cultivation is not only about climbing realms, it is also about carrying what cannot be repaired, learning what one failed to understand, and deciding what kind of person to become after regret has already taken root. Lu Tai had first mocked Chen Ping'an for wasting precious talisman paper. But by the lake, another kind of waste appeared between them. The waste of a life misunderstood, the waste of a small wish ignored, the waste of words that could no longer reach the dead. The wind moved across Emerald Lake. The lotus leaves remained silent. Chen Ping'an sat with his hands behind his head, saying nothing more. And in that silence, one could almost feel it. The young martial artist's path was not being shaped only by fists, swords, talismans, and books. It was also being shaped by old guilt, by the price of small kindnesses, and by the people the world had already forgotten. For now, the treasure-swallowing whale continued forward. But beneath its calm luxury, among ancient treasures, flawed talismans, and memories no one else could see, Chen Ping'an had stepped into another kind of trial, one that did not test strength, but the heart. And trials of the heart, fellow cultivators, are often the ones that decide how far a person can truly walk. Some burdens are not broken by the sword, nor washed away by wine. Sometimes, a knot in the Dao Heart loosens only when the right listener appears. On the treasure-swallowing whale, Chen Ping'an finally opened an old jar sealed deep inside his memory. What he told Lu Tai was not some grand immortal secret, not a tale of heavenly treasures or sect-destroying hatred. It was a piece of the past, something that had fermented in him for years. And that, fellow Daoists, is often the most dangerous kind of memory. The things that seem small to outsiders may be the very things that shape a cultivator's heart. Chen Ping'an had many people close to him. Ning Yao, Aliang, Liu Xianyang, Gu Kan, Daoist Zhang Shanfeng, and others had all left deep marks on his path. Yet he had never spoken of this matter to them. But today, Lu Tai became the one sitting across from him. And how did Lu Tai respond after hearing such a private story? Not with solemn sympathy, not with heavy comfort. Instead, he joked that Chen Ping'an must be warning him that men like himself, unusual and beautiful in manner, were all doomed to miserable endings without even a proper grave. That single joke broke the weight in the room. Chen Ping'an laughed, returned from the railing to the lower floor of the pagoda, and something inside him quietly eased. This was not a breakthrough of realm, but for a cultivator like Chen Ping'an, whose mind carried too many old accounts and unpaid debts, such relief was no small matter. That afternoon, he practiced sword as usual, still the avalanche technique, still the same repeated movements. But today, the resistance was lighter. The flow was smoother. Seen from the outside, it was just sword practice. But seen through the eyes of cultivation, this was the body responding after the heart had loosened. After that day, Lu Tai also changed. He no longer dressed like a peerless beauty whose appearance could confuse the eyes. Instead, he wore an azure robe, fixed his hair with a jade pin, and carried a yellow bamboo folding fan. Just like that, he became an elegant young master. Chen Ping'an naturally felt relieved. From then on, Lu Tai would sometimes descend to the first floor. Sometimes he flipped through books. Sometimes he brewed tea. Sometimes he watched Chen Ping'an practice the proper sword scripture. And though Lu Tai often looked careless, his knowledge truly deserved the reputation of a top disciple from the school of naturalists. He explained things Chen Ping'an had never properly heard before. Fist stances had internal and external divisions. Sword stances could be separated by intent and qi. Martial cultivation was not merely about hard bones and fierce punches. Once a pure martial artist entered the 3 qi tempering tiers, the path became far more delicate. The tempering of the 3 souls required timing, sincerity, and understanding. When Lu Tai spoke of the embryo light soul, he said it carried the yang energy of Taiking. To temper it well, one should practice when the sun was rising, when dawn clouds were at their brightest, when heaven and earth were full of fresh vitality. With enough sincerity, fist practice could move the heavens and crack gold. Perhaps, with enough fortune, the embryo light could gain even greater life force. And here, Chen Ping'an became ashamed, because when he had broken through the 3rd tier at the Sun Clan ancestral residence in Old Dragon City, a golden flood dragon had descended from the dawn clouds. That was no ordinary omen. In the language of martial fortune, it was likely a gift, a chance, a blessing wrapped in celestial form. But Chen Ping'an had punched it back. Not once, twice. When he finally told Lu Tai this, the young master of the Lu clan spat out his tea. For someone like Lu Tai, who had seen strange fortunes and studied the patterns of heaven and earth, this was both absurd and terrifying. He could only raise a thumb and comment that the old mister who taught Chen Ping'an talismans and fist techniques must have been an extremely carefree person, someone who acted by feeling and did not worry over small details. But Chen Ping'an cared about the consequence. Could it be fixed? Lu Tai thought for a while, then suggested that once they reached Parasol Leaf Continent, Chen Ping'an might try his luck at martial sage temples. Some of those temples still had deities wandering the mortal world, and many extraordinary martial artists had gained great opportunities from them. Then, Lu Tai recalled another monstrous martial talent from the great Duan Empire. Before leaving home, he had heard his master speak of this young martial artist. His aptitude was so shocking that multiple martial sage temple deities had taken the initiative to seek him out, hoping to bestow martial fortune upon him. And yet that young man was even more outrageous than Chen Ping'an. He had actually thrown punches and chased away those deities who came with goodwill. Chen Ping'an guessed that this person was most likely Chao Qi, the genius who once cultivated on the Sword Qi Great Wall. Lu Tai only mentioned this briefly, but the meaning was sharp. Fortune is vital on the Great Tao. This is true for mountain cultivators, and it is also true for pure martial artists. Yet receiving fortune is one thing. Recognizing it and holding it with both hands is another. In cultivation, opportunity and calamity often arrive wearing the same face. Countless prodigies have been blessed by heaven, only to die young because they misunderstood the weight of that blessing. Chen Ping'an agreed with this. He had seen enough danger to know that fate never gives without asking for repayment. But Lu Tai suddenly turned the blade of the conversation back toward him. He said, Chen Ping'an had another problem. The young man was too cautious. He stayed in his room, avoided trouble, and even avoided opportunities. Calmness was good. Refusing to move was not. And Lu Tai had a very specific reason for saying this. The treasure-swallowing whale had just opened access to its 4th mystical realm, a damaged remnant from a shattered blessed land. Any passenger could enter by paying 1 grain rain coin. Whatever treasure one found inside would belong to them. The ship would not forcefully claim it, though it would gladly buy anything cultivators wished to sell. This realm was called the Ascending True Immortal Mystical Realm. It belonged to the five-weapon sect of Golden Armor Continent. Inside were remnants of ancient mystical abilities, many so stubborn and strange that even dismantling restrictions required huge resources. The five-weapon sect had explored the place themselves for 100 years, but the gains did not match the cost. So they did what powerful sects often do when a treasure pit becomes too expensive. They turned it into business. They opened it to outsiders, charged entrance fees, and let the world gamble with its own fortune. The realm itself was vast, around 500 kilometers in radius, and this was only a damaged fragment. Its origin had once been one of the 72 blessed lands, and blessed lands were naturally far greater than the 36 small worlds. The place opened once every 10 years. Chi refiners below Golden Core and Nascent Soul could enter, while pure martial artists faced no such restriction. About 200 years earlier, an abode-tier cultivator from circling Ascension Continent had supposedly found a mighty pseudo-celestial tool inside, a divine halberd beyond their ability to protect or properly use. That cultivator sold it to the five-weapon sect and became rich overnight, then used that wealth to force their way into Golden Core, 1 grain rain coin for a Golden Core future. Who in the cultivation world would not feel envy at such a story? Naturally, once the news spread, Golden Armor Continent exploded with interest. For a time, entering the realm was no longer merely a matter of paying 1 grain rain coin. One needed background, connections, and position in line. But after 300 years of people going in and out, many treasures were found, yet nothing ever surpassed that pseudo-celestial halberd. The fever cooled, though the realm still remained worth exploring. Lu Tai, however, understood the trick beneath the legend. That first shocking fortune was probably arranged by the five-weapon sect. Perhaps some brilliant merchant had guided them. Give the world one dazzling success, and cultivators will pay for hope for centuries. It was no different from certain popular cosmetics spreading across continents, because merchants first created the desire, then sold the solution. Still, false bait does not mean the pond has no fish. Lu Tai's master had said that if he had spare time, he could enter and try his luck. Even if he found only some broken trinkets, they might still be worth money. And Lu Tai had indeed chosen this treasure-swallowing whale partly because of his divination and Dao catalyst, but also because he planned to enter this realm and make a profit. He tried to convince Chen Ping'an to go with him. They could explore together, search for immortal treasures, and test their fortune. Chen Ping'an refused. In the end, he only agreed to lend Lu Tai another grain rain coin, while stubbornly refusing to step inside himself. So Lu Tai entered the ascending true immortal mystical realm alone. Around 20 days later, he returned travel-worn but successful. That very day, he handed Chen Ping'an 3 grain rain coins. One was repayment, one was the second coin, and the extra coin was interest. Only after hearing what Lu Tai had gained did Chen Ping'an calmly accept the money. As it turned out, Lu Tai had used a naturalist method to undo the restriction on an ancient immortal residence. The journey held more surprise than danger, and he had nearly become the new master of that residence. But because of the five-weapon sect's rules, he gave up control and privately negotiated with them instead. The result was a massive sum of grain rain coins. The five-weapon sect did not pay all of it immediately. Their intercontinental trade required large flows of lesser heat coins and grain rain coins. So they recorded it as a debt and promised to settle it within half a year, with interest added. On the surface, it looked as if the five-weapon sect had lost badly. But this is where sect business becomes deeper than ordinary bargaining. Once Lu Tai opened the immortal residence, its spiritual energy made it an excellent cultivation site for honored passengers on the treasure-swallowing whale. Golden Core and Nascent Soul Earth immortals, figures ordinary people would look up to like mountain peaks, would be willing to pay for such a place. Sudden profit is beautiful, yes, but stable income is what keeps a great sect alive. In this way, Lu Tai became the third most fortunate person in the history of the ascending true immortal mystical realm. Besides the promised wealth, he also obtained an ancient immortal ascension technique and a high-grade immortal treasure called the Owl Mountain Illusion Pagoda. These two true opportunities he did not sell. And yet, after all of this, after Lu Tai proved with his own hands that Chen Ping'an had missed a tremendous chance, the young man remained calm. He placed the extra grain rain coin on the table. When reading tired him out, he flipped it across the back of his hand, rolled it around, and used it as a small trick to relieve fatigue. To Chen Ping'an, this was practical. To Lu Tai, this was infuriating. He had offered sincere advice again and again, but Chen Ping'an remained steady like a stubborn block of wood. Because of this, Lu Tai stopped inviting him whenever he brewed tea. Of course, Chen Ping'an likely did not mind. Lu Tai was particular about tea, not because he was pretending, but because of his upbringing. He came from an immortal clan with more than 1,000 years of history. Such a background could not be compared with mortal wealth. His elegance was both born and trained. For him, tea had rules. The leaves should be fresh. The method and utensils should carry ancient refinement. The spring water should be clear yet weighty. The drinker should be pure and spirited. Chen Ping'an was pure enough. But in Lu Tai's eyes, he was not spirited enough. Too rigid, too cautious, too stubborn. Good tea would be wasted on him. Then came the moment when a casual complaint struck deeper than a carefully prepared lecture. Lu Tai again mentioned the mystical realm. Money had fallen from the sky like rain, yet Chen Ping'an had hidden under the eaves to avoid being hit. Chen Ping'an listened in silence. Lu Tai felt he could no longer wake this wooden-headed fellow. So almost casually, he threw out one last remark. He said Chen Ping'an's mind was very calm when practicing fist and sword, and that was indeed a strength. But he had to remember one thing. A calm mind was not the same as a dead mind. Water could be still, but it should not become stagnant. Lu Tai said it like idle nonsense. Chen Ping'an heard it like a bell in the heart. For the first time, he stopped his dull, repetitive sword stance. He sat down across from Lu Tai and awkwardly copied his tea-drinking posture. Compared with Lu Tai's natural grace, Chen Ping'an looked like an old farmer trying to imitate a refined scholar discussing the Tao. But this awkwardness revealed something important. Chen Ping'an truly yearned to become a proper scholar. Because of Mr. Qi, because of Li Shisheng, because of city god Shen Wen. Even when Zhang Shanfeng casually recited poems and classics, Chen Ping'an had felt that longing. To him, scholarship was not decoration. It was a kind of moral height, a way of standing properly between heaven and earth. Suppressing his discomfort, he asked Lu Tai whether his state of mind had become too extreme. This question stunned Lu Tai. With his intelligence, he could have casually answered almost anyone else. He could have spoken half-truths, offered elegant nonsense, and still sounded profound. But not today. Not with Chen Ping'an sitting there so seriously. Lu Tai suddenly realized he had built a cage for himself. Then another thought arrived, and his heart drifted for a moment. Could it be starting already? He had believed this opportunity would only sprout after they reached Parasol Leaf Continent, after they experienced more dangers and adventures together. Yet here it was, appearing without warning, far earlier than expected. A true turning point does not always arrive with thunderclouds and heavenly tribulation. Sometimes it comes in the form of a cup of tea, a careless sentence, and one stubborn young man finally asking whether his heart has gone too far. Lu Tai steadied himself. He focused his mind, handed Chen Ping'an a cup, and told him to drink slowly. Only after that would he speak of his own view. And at that moment, fellow Daoists, the real danger was no longer the mist treasure realm, nor the golden flood dragon once punched away, nor even the ancient opportunities waiting on Parasol Leaf Continent. The danger now lay inside Chen Ping'an himself. Because once a cultivator begins to question the shape of his own heart, the next step may be enlightenment, or it may be a crack no sword can mend.